The Middle Rhine. Our boat trip begins in Koblenz. In around 1000 AD, a castle was built on a knoll on the east bank of the Rhine, and Castle Ehrenbreitstein gradually developed. Europe's second largest fortress was given its appearance as we see it today between 1817 and 1828. From here, noblemen once surveyed the river valley as well as an expanding settlement, a strategic location. A cable car above the river connects the fortress with the city of Koblenz, which is situated at the strategic confluence of both the Rhine and the Mosel. On the German corner, a monument was erected to commemorate Emperor Wilhelm I. Following 3 wars, he completed the unification of Germany. Today there's also the main station of a highly controversial modern suspension train, whose construction almost brought about the withdrawal of this area's World Cultural Heritage status. The peninsula derived its name from the Order of German Knights, who had a mansion constructed here in 1216. Each year, more than 2 million tourists come here. In St. Castor Basilica, negotiations took place which in 843 AD led to the Treaty of Verdun that clarified the division of the Frankish Empire between the 3 sons of Louis the Pious. Goddess Square has been known since the year 2000 for its history column that describes the city's past in 10 scenes. Koblenz likes to be known as a city that has time to dream. From the Middle Ages to the late 18th century, Koblenz was the residence of the powerful archbishops of Trier. In 1794, the city was taken over by France, and in 1815 by Prussia. In the heart of the old city, Jesuit Square is a reminder of the homonymous order. And close by is the Shangle Fountain, with a figure of the Koblenz scalawags. Almost within reach of a scholar of the local convent school. On the banks of the Rhine, a Prussian government building rises powerfully in neo-Romanesque style. Adjacent to it is the Electoral Palace, within which royalty once resided. This magnificent building was designed by Elector Clemens Wenceslaus in the style of early French classicism. Today, Koblenz continues to exude the impressive history of a colourful period and is the cultural centre of the region of the Middle Rhine. We travel along the Rhine. In the morning mist, our journey on this, Europe's both mightiest and busiest river, leads to our first destination. Townhouses, stately homes and churches form the romantic old town of Boppard. The proud St. Severus church dominates this small town and its twin towers. It dates back to an early Christian building which, following Roman occupation, was built on the remains of a Roman bathing palace. With fine stained glass windows and painted interior walls. Boppard developed from a Roman garrison. Following the invasion of the Alemanni, a city wall was built in order to protect what was a toll castle. Today, the town has developed into an attractive tourist destination, surrounded by woods and vineyards. We travel further up the Rhine, whose source is situated in the Swiss Alps as it gradually makes its way to the North Sea, 1,320 kilometers across Europe. The Celts called it Renus, the Romans Rhenus, and the Germans referred to the river as Father Rhine. Slowly, the Rhine Valley becomes a canyon. Here, sailors who survived the dangerous Lorelei rapids presented various sacrifices to their gods, until Gore, a holy man, arrived from the south of France and converted them. On the opposite bank is St. Gorshausen, that 1,000 years ago was a fishing village. It came into the possession of the Counts of Katzenelnbogen in 1284, and they granted it the status of a town and surrounded it with a city wall that was extended up to the castle. Fishing, viticulture, and successful trade allowed the nobility and their subjects to lead a prosperous life. We continue upriver, where it's now hard to imagine that just ahead once lay a most dangerous and feared section of the river. It emerges here, the beautiful yet hazardous Lorelei, a thing of myth and legend. We pass by a 133-metre-high rock on a sharp bend where the Rhine is barely 113 metres wide. Legend tells of a beautiful mermaid who enchanted and distracted sailors with her singing so that their boats would be destroyed on the rocks. Soon, the river becomes more tranquil. Slowly, the craggy slopes change to vineyards and the river valley widens. Next, Oberwesel, a city of towers and wine. As can be seen, a huge defensive wall protects the entire city. The Schönberg and several massive watchtowers provide a good sense of security and have been well preserved. The red-coloured Lieffrauen Church is an impressive example of the important part played by religious, social and commercial life in the Middle Ages. Its Gothic ecclesiastical architecture continues into its interior despite it having been built in earlier medieval times, featuring stone, wood and various murals. Huge stained glass windows lead the eye down to a golden altar, one of the oldest and most precious shrines. The pipe organ was added in 1745. Only a handful of buildings have been preserved and restored. Sturdy defences were essential in order to protect the prosperous city from possible hostilities. In 1689, in the 9 Years' War, Oberwesel was occupied for the first time by the French and destroyed. But Schönberg survived. However, the most powerful river in Western Europe is not only of historic interest, it's also the busiest waterway in the world. The Rhine has always been important in the history of European trade. Now the river accommodates commercial shipping from Basel right up until it enters the North Sea. Kaub has always played an important role. Marshal Blücher followed Napoleon from here to the Rhine, and for centuries the fear of the Bingen hole brought much prosperity to the city, situated between the Guttenfels fortress. Precious cargoes were loaded onto carts and transported by horse to Rüdesheim and vice versa. This introduced much rewarding work and also a good range of fine food. The former wealth of the city is still obvious today. Its narrow streets once safeguarding its population. The parish church protrudes from the city walls like a bulwark and squeezes itself between the buildings. And everywhere are well-preserved clues to the city's history, which is tantamount to being an open-air museum. Kaub's city walls were built in around 1200 AD. Outside the city, the waterway narrows dramatically and reveals Pfalzgrafenstein castle, whose lords were well versed in the levying of taxes. In the 650 years of its existence, it was never conquered. The trip continues upriver. The river valley widens and green dominates its banks. Bacharach nestles in the confluence of the Stiger Valley into the extensive Rhine Valley, protected by a sturdy wall. Above the town is the Stahleck fortress that was first recorded in 1095 and became the residence of the Count of Palatine on the Rhine in 1142. This position represented one of 7 electors in the Middle Ages. The Count Palatine on the Rhine had the important function of being the empire vicar. Between the death of a German king and the coronation of his successor, the Count ruled the land and took control of the court. Well-preserved half-timbered buildings highlight the former importance of the city and give an indication of its prosperity. A walk through the streets is a walk through German cultural history. The old half-timbered houses were restored following a devastating fire in 1872. Buildings that now act as a tourist magnet. Bacharach is like something from a colourful fairy tale. This city of wine is also known as a secret centre of Rhine romance, a fact that has attracted a great many artists and writers here, such as Victor Hugo, Achim von Arnim and Clemens Brentano. The Catholic St. Peter parish church stems from the late Romance period. It was built at the end of the 12th century as a gallery basilica with 3 naves and renovated in the late 19th century. Its medieval quality has survived. A grey pillar with white in its joints and ribs, and its window walls in English red. Its location on a slope and with limited space meant a restricted ground plan. However, this did not restrict its height. Dominating the sacred building is a church tower and crenellates. Just beyond the church is a steep route up to Stahleck Castle. The view is a world of roofs constructed above the city's narrow streets. From the top of the castle can be seen the Rhine Valley far below, as once viewed by the Palatine counts. Since 2002, this cultural landscape of castles, palaces, and ancient cities has been designated as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Both people and goods have been transported on the Rhine by sailing ships since the time of the Romans, up until the invention of steam navigation. Today, the steamer is a nostalgic relic and used only for tourist trips. A whole armada of boats travels on this section of the Rhine, many of which anchor along both its banks. The river was eventually tamed by the advent of hydraulic engineering, which brought about the end of tolls set by various lords. Since the Congress of Vienna, there's also been a common agreement between the countries that border the Rhine. On the riverbanks, fishing villages came into being, often protected by the aristocracy. Craftsmen and merchants also settled here. In the Bingen of Roman times, a fortress controlled all the traffic on both land and water. Later, the responsibility of Klopp Castle. In the 5th century, the city fell into the hands of the Franks, and in 982 AD, Emperor Otto II assigned it to the Collegiate Church of Mainz. From its earliest days, there was a Christian community in Bingen, as evidenced by a 4th century gravestone. Klopp Fortress overlooks the city. It was rebuilt in the middle of the 20th century and became the city's main administrative centre. Bingen was totally destroyed 3 times, but the city survived, although its number of historic buildings is few. The St. Martin Basilica stands on the foundations of a Roman temple. It was first mentioned in a document in 793 AD and was repeatedly destroyed and rebuilt. The city's 1,000-metre-long pedestrian area contains a fountain that depicts the story of the much-revered Saint Hildegard. There's also a splendid riverside area. Our journey now passes by customs offices, warehouses, and the old crane, which in the Middle Ages was used to load and unload the river traffic for a fee, a healthy source of income. High up on the opposite bank is the huge Germania statue situated in the midst of numerous vineyards that point the way to Rüdesheim. Announced by several ships that lie at anchor, the final destination of our cruise on the Rhine is reached. Rüdesheim on the Rhine, a picturesque town that possesses more visitors than residents, its sunny location being ideal for the production of splendid wines. A medieval church, wooden buildings and stately homes. And the famous Drosselgasse characterise the city. Formerly, the boatmen preferred to unload their cargo here and transport it by horse and cart downriver to Kaub. From there, it was loaded back on board ship. The 2 major attributes of the city's prosperity: wine and the River Rhine. This 14th century Catholic parish church was once in poor order, but has now been restored to its original condition. The Klunkardshof is a late medieval, half-timbered residential building of the 15th century, once owned by a wealthy bourgeois family. Today, much of Rüdesheim has been well preserved, and today tourism has replaced shipping as a source of income for its inhabitants. The tranquility that Johann Wolfgang von Goethe enjoyed from his visits here has now become busy due to the riverboats that transport tourists to and from the Eagle Tower by the old city wall. The Middle Rhine Valley reflects the history of Europe, with cultural monuments and cultivated countryside, crowded settlements along narrow banks, and various noble castles situated on rocky ledges. This is where our adventure ends. A boat trip through Germany's famous river landscape that has captured much of the romance of times gone by.